Hello and welcome. It's my first time actually here at the Ginposium. Very eager to speak to you, obviously. Some of you I've seen before. Some of you know me from our own brands. Some of you might know me from the consultancy side on the engineering side, and some of you from the laboratory side. And I see both colleagues and friends and clients in the audience. But what I'm going to talk to you about mainly is the benefit you might have from the chemical analysis. So, why should we do all this? Obviously, safety. And I would like to jump back to what Michael said earlier. We tend to be quite dramatic when we do this over in the States. Obviously, most of you know how to distill, but over there, it's the Wild West. And you have these distilleries where they have open flame burners besides doing gins, coming off at 190 proof, whatever. And that's dangerous. It kills people. And what annoys me with the likes of Silver Trail, I was there a couple of months earlier and told them this is an accident waiting to happen. And a guy died. So think about what you're doing. Some of what we do, obviously on the whiskey side, most often it's not that dangerous because we come up to 80% alcohol or something. That's hard to ignite, or at least not as easy. But when you go up to 96, that's 12 degrees ignition point. So be careful, be safe. And obviously, you could test that by whatever chemical engineering as well. So safety otherwise, laboratory-wise, obviously, Michael again had some points. We had the stuff from acacia bark, from cinnamon, where we extract maybe not stuff that you die directly from, but they're quite cancerogenic. The coumarin stuff, for example. When you build your recipe, you might want it to be compliant because most of you want to be big sooner or later. I know I want to. So if I'm going to sell my product in the States, it's good if it's compliant there as well, so you don't need to alter your recipe before going there, because some of the ingredients you might have in your recipe or might think about in your recipe might not be compliant in America. So obviously safety from that hazard. You have polyphenols, you have plasticizers, you have stuff that might affect the safety of both the ones working in the distillery, but obviously also your customers, end of the day. Quality. Quality, obviously, somewhat of a subjective term. Most of us do marvelous products. We might like different stuff. Some of you like green, some of you like red, some of you like Volvo, some of you like Saab, and some of you like real cars, like Bentleys and stuff. It doesn't mean necessarily it's good or bad. We like different stuff. But quality is doing the same stuff over and over again. The reason some of the big brands here are big brands, it's because they're doing the same stuff again and again and again. So consistency and quality is kind of playing each other against each other. Landed cost. Knowing your laboratory analyses make you money. I bet any distillery that's been around here for a couple of years know that, okay, if I do this, all of a sudden I could optimize my ingredients so I don't overpitch. So I don't go over my sensory threshold, because that's just wasting money away. Adding your vanilla, for example. Vanilla distills over at 232 degrees Celsius. How much vanilla do you add to your pot still distillation? Does it distill over? Is it just money down the drain? How do you and build your recipe? So that's the reason we do these analyses. So what makes a gin? Obviously, what we should test, all gins should obviously have water, ethanol, and junipers. That's the 110 2008. So if there's anybody here from Pernod or Diageo or whatever, might sit down in Spirits Europe. So if you saw that awful suggestion now for legislation for gin, I might be daddy for that, because we actually made that with aquavit, where we actually legislated some levels. So all of a sudden, we could actually make flavored out of it. And that's what I would like to see from gins. If we define what a gin is, all of a sudden we could make flavored gin, like we do flavored vodkas. But that's my point of view. So water, ethanol, and junipers. So obviously, water is important. When you do your extractions, if you know your water, if you don't have treated water, obviously, if you have metals in your water, I just now actually doing a recipe for one of the islands in Scotland, and they tend to have quite a lot of manganese in their water. That gives a beautiful mouthfeel, both to their whiskey and their intended gin. Unfortunately, though, it buffers pH. So all of a sudden, you extract something completely different from your recipe. So that affects, obviously. So water is important. Ethanol is ethanol. So if you start from NGS, that's nothing. It shouldn't actually have any taste, scent, whatever. If it does, use another supplier. So junipers, we're going to jump back to junipers, obviously. Then we have, most gins obviously use coriander and citrus. We're going to talk about that as well. And obviously we have many gins. Again, we talked about all of these with angelica, acacia, cardamom, chamomile, whatever we use, licorice. I'm going to focus this lecture on these three main ingredients. But looking at junipers. So if we look into the genealogy of junipers, what we know today, or what we tend to talk about, there's 67 varieties of junipers, all giving us different characters, good or bad. Generally, we tend to use the Junipers communis, but there are other varieties here that are so much more interesting. That might be a good USP for you, but also contains a lot more of the pinene, a lot more of the myrcene that we might want to have, and all of a sudden we actually make more money because our pitch rate could be half the amount of junipers. Again, junipers might not be that expensive, but again, it does matter end of the day. So I'm going to come back to how we actually realize what kind of junipers we actually use. Coriander, though, that's a nice friend to have in a gin. When we do the analytics of most of your gins, or the gins around the world, we find out that actually more gins are more prone to be identified by the coriander than actually from the junipers. Good thing though, more or less, coriander, there's wild and there's the one we actually harvest generally. So quite similar. So the big difference with coriander is actually where we grow it, is terroir, and how we use it, if we ground it, if we use it whole, what parts we use, and the distillation technique, obviously. Citrus. Most of us use some kind of citrus. There's a hell of a lot of varieties. It's probably the most promiscuous fruit out there. It's kind of like going to Ibiza. It finds a mate in any bar you can find. And they create all these new flavors, all these new characters. But it's quite fun, actually, when you look at it. Because if you look into your citrus, these are the main grandfathers of most of the citric fruits, what we know. So if we have a lack of citrus or a lack of lemons, what could we use instead? If we have a lack of bitter orange, we could probably use somebody else. Because all of a sudden, if we see what actually happens with this, if we mix a mandarin with pomelo, we get sweet orange. If we get a mandarin and pomelo, all of a sudden get sour orange, wilmet, whatever. If we blend these together, if we take a sour orange here and we blend that with a citron or a medica, all of a sudden we get a lemon. So if we know what to do, it's quite simple to actually, okay, if we have a lemon here, obviously we know we want limonene. We'll come into that, but also you want citral. Citral is actually the big difference between an orange and a lemon. So all of a sudden, if we lack some here, okay, use a kaffir instead. Or not, but you might. Simple enough. So how do we test this? There's no substitution whatsoever for organoleptic testing. Taste and scent, obviously you don't need to taste as much. But that's the fun part. But the scent it, do your trials. Whatever recipe you do or thinking about, try it, just alter it a bit and see what actually happens when you do a small alteration. Organoleptic, core 1. Then obviously you have microscopy, you have all these liquid chromatography, because if we, very, very valiant here, obviously, with some of what I'm going to touch into now is actually some of what Professor Pauly said as well. Fun thing is that GC curves you're about to see here is actually made on the same type of machine from Chimatsu. Different columns, I would imagine, though. But so obviously, some of the taste components, generally we make taste components. If we're going to evaluate taste in a product, we use liquid chromatography. If we're going to evaluate scent, if it distills over at a high temperature, generally it's scent. We could do that in liquid phase or in solid or in headspace. That's gas chromatography. If we want to know the metals, obviously that's something that would affect your extracts when you actually blend it, if you have it, how long you have it, if you ground your coriander or not ground it or whatever you do. That's atomic absorption or ICP-MS or whatever kind of use you want to do. If we want to know the actual DNA, if we actually use Junipers communis or if we use Tardilium, coriander or whatever, the simple way is just doing a PCR. And trust me, you could buy one of these sets off internet for $50 and you could do it yourself back home and you'll come out with a fairly good result. It's 90% correct, and that's enough for doing a good job. So you could actually realize what you actually do and get better raw products in, with better extract. So how do we build these methods? Now, how many chemists are in the room? Some. Chemistry is the most beautiful thing you can imagine. So bear with me. When you leave the room here, all of you want to be chemists and you want to teach your children to be chemists and whatever. Because this is actually language before the Tower of Babel. When everybody speaks the same. It's all just these block letters, Lego bits of bricks or whatever. These letters, depending on how we put these together, we get everything in the universe. Everything, everything. Just putting it differently together. Still, it might look a bit complex, a lot of letters. Half of them we could take away directly, because if we ever see them, we die. So then we have half left. Half of them are quite as solid or inert and whatever, and doesn't affect us much. But the beautiful thing, what we're about and what we're doing here is actually just 5 bricks. It's 5 letters. It's hydrogen, carbon, oxygen, sulfur, and nitrogen. It's that simple. Depending on how we put these together, we get coffee, we get gin, tonic, lemons, oranges, sex, whatever you want. All of it. 2 of them we take away, obviously. Sulfur. Anybody drink Heineken? So you know sulfur. It's a good preservative, though. Passes through. It's nothing dangerous if you don't eat it with a spoon. You get bad gases and stuff, but otherwise it's fine. Nitrogen, though, nitrogen is the reason we actually use copper in our distillation equipment. Because if we don't use copper, we get ethyl carbamate, or we don't take the nitrogen away and we get cancer, and that's dangerous and stuff. So we want to take that away. So we have 3 left. And from these 3 left, what do we get? Obviously, we get the happy dog here. 2 carbons, an oxygen, and some hydrogens. Simple enough. But also, we get all these fun stuff. Alpha-pinene, obviously, the pinene stuff from Junipers. We get the limonene that we have in the citrus fruit. We get the caryophyllene, which is the fun stuff in the stuff you smoke or in the gin that we always should have there. That's the fun stuff. That's why you should never, ever chill filter. We'll see if we find that time to talk about that. And yet the linalool. Linalool, main constituent, obviously, of coriander. It's also in cat piss. But the thing is with this, That's the beautiful thing, the off note you want. When I build recipes, when I do perfumes or whatever, you always need an off note and an on note. You can never ever make anything perfect. You need to have the crooked smile of Mona Lisa to make it actually happen. When you build a recipe, when you build a gin or a whiskey or whatever, you make an on note and an off note. And actually, linalool is the off note in gin. And you need to have that. If you look in an old building, you actually find it here, and if you go out, look at the facade of the building, you have one of the statues being upside down. That's a known error that they put in because at the time only God was perfect. Nowadays, not so much. That's what we're talking about. I said, it's a lot of slides here. I'm just going to shoot them through because you're going to get them afterwards anyway. It's more to give Professor Pauly the method. So you have it here, so you could replicate it if you want. That's the curve, and however you want to put that into your GCMS, 60-meter column. Obviously, look at different suppliers of junipers. This is just a simple, so never mind, same extraction, same variety of Junipers communis. But if you look at what you actually have in here, it's quite different from one to another, from a Bulgarian to a Polish one, or one from Bulgaria, I think. So quite different. So obviously we have different efficiency grades. We have different characters. Again, we have the fun stuff, the caryophyllene, the humulene, the stuff here, that's the funny stuff. The cadenine, which is actually what we actually get from real junipers. Limonene, the alpha-pinene, obviously we have all that. But you see, it's quite different from one curve to another. But if we actually put them above each other here, all of a sudden we see this is with alpha-pinene, which is the predominant one. So obviously you see that's much, much higher in one than in the other. So if we use that just from the sake of alpha-pinene, the other ones are 5 times as expensive per alpha-pinene unit to buy in. Simple. Simple economics. Think if you could actually cut your cost of juniper by 80%. Simple enough. This is without alpha-pinene. All of a sudden you see a difference here in limonene, which you actually could get from something else. Caryophyllene then might not be as much, but some of the other stuff you could get from other botanicals as well. So, coriander, same stuff all over again. Big difference here from one to another. Again, we'll see it in the linalool. Here's the major stuff in these. And, oh, sorry, jumped over. That was, so enormous, you actually have the areas over there, but enormous difference from one to another. Could be half as much of linalool or whatever you want to extract. Citrus. The fun thing with citrus is actually there's a lot of headspace, a lot of stuff that scents, but what actually distills over, not so much. So we could actually interchange one citrus fruit for another quite easily. And that would cut costs for all of us using bitter lemon, which is double the price of any lemon or whatever. Obviously, we could change that by adding some other varieties and making money, but also character, end of the day. And you obviously see that here, quite big difference from one to another. And this is bitter orange, as said. You see quite big difference from one to another. Again, you could examine these from when Nicholas sent them out to you. So, the fun thing, to actually jump into different varieties of gin, some of them made by you in the room. So this is our method for testing generic gins. We test about 1,500 to 2,000 different brands or labels of gins every year. We do that for competitions and for the pure joy of it, but also for our knowledge and for clients. So we get quite a lot of data in to analyze. But we need to have one core fingerprint that we use to compare with everything else. This is what we use. So Obviously, not all gins are created equal. We like different stuff, not bad, not good, whatever. We do different stuff, all of these being obviously good stuff. So, Monkey 47, whatever, a lot of stuff going on there. A lot. Replicate this, that's a job for a master distiller. A lot of stuff going on. Henric's, not so much, but still quite a lot. Beefeater, still quite a lot, and you have, and mind that these are the same concentration. So we're all done equally and comparable. So quite different, but still, they all taste and scent gin. So all of a sudden, when we compare them, and we do that to some of the ones that's selling even more, again, same curve. Quite different, isn't it? So we could actually cut back on the linalool to half, and it would still taste the same, or scent the same, or be in the same category. Again, if we should define that or not. Again, if we have them compared side by side, same varieties of gin again, and all of a sudden you have some with extreme amount of, I haven't actually put labels on this because I didn't want to. If you go back to the presentation, you could probably analyze that, but I didn't want to point any specific, but you see there's a big difference. And these are all big selling and very good brands. But we can make them quite different. So this was just showing that if you actually do your analytics, you will make more money. And if you make more money, you can make a safe distillery, do your first investment and buy a pressure relief valve for your still. That's $50 from Home Depot. Save a life. Simple stuff like that. But also that drives the whatever you do besides that forwards as well. You could do similar tests. Obviously, you could do all this back home at your own distilleries or your home kitchen or whatever. Try different feedstocks. That will give you different varieties. Some of the speaker here today mentioned that when we actually go in looking at these, we realize that no, you have not ever been over 96% alcohol, especially we see that quite a lot from the American distillers. If they home distill whatever they do and they bring it up to 88, whatever, they make quite a flavorsome gin, good, or a vodka even, but it hasn't actually been over. It's quite easy to prove because you have methanol and you have higher alcohols that wouldn't be there. And if you buy NGS and you add Junipers or whatever you add, you don't add other alcohols. So it's easy to see. So it's easy to call you out if you bluff, if anybody wants to. Try different ingredients. Try different maceration level, maceration times. Try to crush your botanicals. Different distillation methods. We talked about that. Vacuum distillation, vapor infusion, or pot still distillation, whatever you do. Different cut points, obviously. That differs. Catalyzers. Anybody use catalyzers here? That's the fun stuff. That's the really fun stuff. Especially if you do vodkas as well. Because all of a sudden, if you work with catalyzer, which is approved and legal and compliant and everything, if you put the right catalyzer in your column, all of a sudden you'll get all these beautiful banana notes or almond notes in. Just simple. And you could reuse those catalyzers again and again and again, and you don't have to buy the bananas or the cubebs or whatever. So again, more secure, more compliant, more consistent. Single shot, multi-shot, we talked about that. That is a difference, obviously. Do you make it bland? Do you make it that way? Or production capacity? Again, a lot of aspects. Blending, proofing, aerating. That's an important part. Never, ever forget aerating your product. Filtering, how you filter it. That's important. We'll touch base on that as well. And obviously, how you bottle. So, chill filtration. I just want to mention this because I'm an extreme advocate against chill filtration. I understand why everybody do it, and it's fine enough if you do the right distillation, and if you do your cut points correctly, you don't need to chill filter. But you take hell of a lot away from the product. And this is just to show it. Because this is the top curve here. It's actually GCMS, same method we actually just did. And the top black one, that's our gin as is and as we sell it. The bottom one is not actually a real chill filtration because we just brought it down to 2 degrees Celsius, not to -2, which is the industry standard otherwise. And it's mechanically filtered to 0.2 microns. So all of a sudden, you look at the alpha pinene. Alpha pinene goes down to about half. So again, if you chill filter, you need to double up on your junipers. Looking at my myrcene, again, myrcene, if you don't know it, is the more wet forest variety of pine, and those Danish Christmas trees and whatever, might be some red sausages as well, I don't know. Limonene, we take quite a lot of that away. Linalool, the cat piss is all right though, it's still there. It's hard to wash away, so it's still there. It's not affected by this method. Terpenine, not so much actually, but all the fun stuff here in the end. The caryophyllene, again, that's the fun stuff. You should always have, you should strive for that, because that's the fun stuff in that, those stuff that you're not allowed to smoke in most countries in Europe. There are some states, but without the bad stuff. This is proved and is generally regarded as safe, no bad sides, no downsides to this. It's like swimming without piranhas. You have the germicrene here, which is the fun stuff. I like those molecules with fun structures. It looks like a bird, and you must be happy when you see a bird. And, so. Cadmium, obviously, but you take all these stuff away. The stuff that actually defines you. Bring it in, keep it in there. Tell the audience. The whiskey industry's done a great job with that. Say, okay, if you actually have a chill haze, it's a good product because we left it in there. It's not always the truth, but it's a good way of doing it. So, that was my presentation.